So we'll bring the Stockbridge Fire EMS Committee meeting to order, and today's meeting is to review what stage we're at now and make a recommendation to the select board. Because some of the things that are going to come up in the next few months are going to include everything from an ambulance purchase on this year's town meeting for 2 years from now, beginning the development of an IMA and things like that. So, and then we need to look at exactly what the building will be. While we have some concepts as a default, sort of, I think it's imperative that the fire company, with a couple other individuals, look separately at what the building needs are, instead of just looking at what some other communities have. So this is a stage set. So what I thought we'd do is just go over the PowerPoint that I had sent you guys. A lot of it we'll just skip right through. And if there's any specific questions or comments, and then what do we want to recommend as a group to the select board to move forward. So. All right, so all of you have seen this slide, and for anybody that's here or online, this is where we are at this point, which is with the town of Stockbridge and West Stockbridge. We started with the idea of combining our fire EMS, hire multiple full-time EMS personnel, backed up volunteer support. We've narrowed it down to just Stockbridge and West Stockbridge and a 24/7 operation for enhanced coverage, shared resources, increased professional support. Couple of the negatives that are involved in this are the high initial cost and then the increase in operational costs. We have looked at the financial consideration of the communities and where we sit as far as the ability to take on some additional costs. Both West Stockbridge and Stockbridge are strong economically, and definitely something that, if shared by the residents, is something that can be supported. So then after that, we began digging more into what would it look like. So the proposal is still, as we've been talking about, is for a chief, 2 deputy chiefs, and then 6 other firefighters / EMTs in a paid per position. 1 deputy chief would coordinate the fire service aspects for both communities, and 1 would focus on the EMS, but it would provide us with a chain of command so that if we were to lose any one piece of this, we'd be able to fill in. We also are proposing to have an oversight board, which would be made up of the fire chief, the administrators from the 2 towns, and select board designees. And they would meet quarterly and just go over financial reports, budget, status reports by the fire chief to what's happening in the 2 communities. So we keep both communities well aware of what's happening with what's going on. We looked at the different methodologies as far as how to afford this, and we think the EQV per capita, which is basically a combination of your population and the overall valuation of your community. When you put those 2 together, it ends up being a 60-40 split, with Stockbridge picking up 60% of the costs and West Stockbridge picking up 40%. Now, this is based on current numbers that we're using. In a couple of years, those numbers will change based on cost of living adjustments, things like that. But we're looking at roughly almost 600,000 for Stockbridge and 400,000 for West Stockbridge, based on that 40-60 split. Location and then capital costs. So we brought in that JB consultant who looked at the different ways that where we can locate individual items. We started off with looking at our shared agreements. So West Stockbridge is working on right now developing an IMA for the next 2 years with Richmond for their shared EMS. Right now, we have two shared EMS, one with Lennox and one with Lee that we currently pay into. The one in Lee is going to be cycling down because of that grant we received from the federal government. So it's going to reduce the cost by 100,000 this year and then 50,000 more the following year. And then if we can be up and running, then we can be out of that agreement and running our own. The proposed thing is around a base at Stockbridge Central Station at first, and then moving to a new station on the West Stockbridge Road. This is the improvement in the response time, with red being bad, yellow being okay, and green being solid. At first, coming out of the west, you can see why it's so important to put the station in the west at the 183, 102 connection, because it improves the quality of response throughout all of West Stockbridge and Stockbridge as a whole. Well, right now, our primary response is coming out of our bottom, our south east corner of our town. So once we move, that's the current response time based on all the data that was put in with West Stockbridge coming out of theirs and us coming out of ours. And we can see that there's a significant improvement once we can get a station up and running. Default location. So this is just, we could still examine what other properties may be available in the 183, 102 area. But a default location would be right near the water treatment plant, right at the tree edge line where Pine Woods is just slightly, if you're looking at the road, just slightly further up the road to the left. That gets us very close to that ideal. Ideal would be right on the 183, 102. But, you have to consider what we own and what we don't, and whether or not there are other options. A new fire station, we've looked at a couple. Now these, once again, would be the default. If we can't come up with a better solution, a better idea for the building, the defaults would be something similar to the Hadley, Cambridge, or Williamsburg buildings. So we have a current default location and current default design, but these aren't the finals. So right now, I think that I spoke with Chief about this. We came up with the idea of creating a building committee, similar to what you see with school as one for the new school, a committee that would look at what are the needs, what are the best based on operational needs, and then costs associated with it. A 5-person committee. The committee would then submit its own recommendations to the select board. I'm proposing, and this is just me, we can discuss this further, that it would include 3 members of the fire company, 1 member from the community at large, and then since we want to have buy-in by the finance committee for the costs and the rest, have either a member of the finance committee or their designee on this committee. Basically with an idea that they spend the next anywhere between 9 and 12 months coming up with a preferred one to bring to the following year's town meeting in May of 2026. Get it to the select board about the turn of the year, probably in January of 2026, with then a recommendation of the select board to bring to the annual town meeting the following year. Annual cost, when you look at using just the defaults that we've established, we'd be looking at roughly $350,000 for the building costs and then those operational costs. We've already talked about we do need how to bridge the next 2 years. So for 2026 and 2027, we have our agreement set up with Lee and Lennox. West Stockbridge would set up theirs with Richmond. Fire support. So the town would supply fire support in 2026 and 2027, provide a command structure for both departments, and provide a daily coverage of approximately 10 hours a day, 7 days a week. This would be bringing on 2 additional firefighters. Now, between what West Stockbridge is going to chip in and the $100,000 in savings that's being reduced by our payment to Lee, that would allow us to bring this on affordable to both communities. It would require about 154,000 additional funds from Stockbridge and about 101,000 in funds from West Stockbridge. Once again, keeping proportional costs. One of the things that if we're serious about moving this forward for 2028 is it takes about 2 years to get an ambulance built. So we would be proposing that the towns of Stockbridge and West Stockbridge move with articles to pick up the costs. And this is an approximate cost. We'll try to nail it down. If we're agreeable on this, I'll have Chief reach out to ambulance companies and get some bid prices. It's called indicative pricing. We can't go out and bid yet, but at least get from them an idea of what, based on our ambulance needs would be. But looking at an approximate, and this was talking about surrounding towns and stuff, we're looking at 450,000. So 180,000 from West Stockbridge, once again, 40%, and Stockbridge of 270,000. And that would allow us to have an ambulance come in. And then we have the Lee one that we currently have. That is not a frontline vehicle. It is a backup to be used when needed, if the other one need to be out for repairs or stuff, but we don't see that as a primary response vehicle. And that's where we'd be at as far as ambulances. Cost for the paid call, and then what are the debt implications for capital costs for Stockbridge. So this slide just shows what the cost would be and how it would ramp up. So right now we're spending with our agreements about 620,000. Next year we'll go to 728 with West Stockbridge about 195 and going to 281. You can see that the last slide is we are going to, if both towns agree to this, we're going to actively pursue for the next 2 years to get a SAFER grant and bring in the remaining 5 employees under a SAFER grant. That would pick up for 4 years. If we were to get approved in this from the federal government, they would pick up salaries and benefits for 4 years. So the last community I'm aware of was Lanesboro, who got one. And that was quite a while ago. I'm not sure if anybody else has gotten one.
I think Dalton was a few years ago and Pittsfield was a few years before that, but that was under the old structure of the 180, 60, 40, 20, and then off.
I don't think anybody's got one under.
Not one under the new one that I'm aware of.
So we would actively pursue applying. We would get 2 shots at it before we're up and operational to possibly get this funding in place. As far as the debt, because there's been some concerns, what will that do to the tax rate? So right now, the town of Stockbridge has the water tank and the road and bridge replacement grants that are out there, that if we were to set aside about $1 million of free cash to cover debt payments in 29, 30, and 31, we could bring on a roughly $5 million building with that sliding, using free cash to cover 3 years of debt payments and then have the debt slide under our debt schedule. Our debt schedule would pretty much remain, as shown in this slide, would pretty much remain level. So this is what we commonly refer to for finance people as smoothing, not allowing any big jump in any 1 year. Of course, that would come back to what the final design of the building and assets are. This is all just based on the default ones that we have right now, and further analysis of the building location and the rest still has to be looked at. And those were the sources that we have. So the question for this committee is, are we prepared now to recommend to the select board to move ahead with this as a proposal? What are our feelings? Do we think there's some things that need to be added to this, taken away? Are we not ready yet to make a recommendation? Do we still need some further meetings and further discussion? So I would now open it up to the committee to talk about what are our thoughts at this point. Or does this address, it doesn't answer all our questions. There's still questions that need to be answered, but it gets us rolling and moving forward. And I'm going to be presenting whatever we decide are our points. I'll be also presenting with Marie Ryan January 21st over in West Stockbridge. So to get them to get the buy-in too. So if we can get our board to do our buy-in, their board to do our buy-in. We are committing ourselves to moving forward because we're putting the money up for the ambulance and we're agreeing on the next 2 years of the additional funds that would be needed from both towns in order to start the whole process. So.
I have a question. What's the chance that the combined town agreement wouldn't come together in its ultimate form for whatever reason? That either one of the select boards turns it down, either one of the town meetings, votes it down.
I mean, there's always that possibility, and part of that's going to be now going to the two communities and presenting this plan, possibly having some public outreach sessions so we can get feedback from the communities and basically convincing the two communities that, yes, this is an increased cost, but look at what we're building here, a 24/7 backbone of paid staff and then volunteer departments that are going to work in combination to create, what we think is, the best option that we have on the table. I can't guarantee that it's gonna.
Yeah, but I'm more asking.
It doesn't dissolve everything all at once. So even if one town, the only town that could possibly dissolve the whole plan altogether would be the town of Stockbridge. Because if the town of West Stockbridge wasn't able to continue, or for whatever reason, it didn't pass their select board or their town meeting, but a variation of that would pass our town meeting, what it would do is it would change our overall timeline, because in order to ease that debt process that the town of Stockbridge would be assuming, we wouldn't be able to hire as many people at once. And it would have to spread out probably in the fiscal year 29 or 30 before we could reach our full staffing and ambulance structure, because we'd have to move things around. But the plan wouldn't die unless it died really with the town of Stockbridge voters, because we're the meat and potatoes of the agreement.
Yeah. It would have to also be a little bit of what would Stockbridge on its own be able to accommodate? And it might be some type of hybrid system where we have staff on during certain hours and then we have a overtime budget and they're called in as need. We would have to reevaluate if it was to be shut down in one of the communities. We'd have to look.
Well, I'm more asking about the initial steps that we would potentially vote on today.
So the initial steps that we're voting on today is to walk that bridge, the next 2 years bridge, and getting an ambulance ordered. It's going to mean for us about 157,000 more in the budget and about 101,000 more in West Stockbridge's budget. So these would be the first steps. And if they go to town meeting and get shut down at this point, this isn't going to move forward. So
we just don't buy the ambulance? Is that?
Well, then we'd have to come back and think about, okay, what is our plan now? And who shot it down? Did Stockbridge say they don't want it? Does West, that, I hate to say it, town meeting's the ultimate say in what happens in a community. So it can only
risk. Yeah.
We can only present it. It's sort of like whether to a board of directors, this is the town meeting will decide if it is. All we can do is try to put together what we think is the best outline for a plan, and with timelines that we've been building toward, funding that we've already acquired from that federal grant to now can we go after some other grants and things like that. So, but we also have to tell people if we don't get those grants, here's what it's going to cost to move forward. So,
right.
And get us to a system that we think is both structurally sound, financially sound, and provides the best setup that we have for right now.
So right now, the recommendation would be that we just kind of move forward in the next step of the planning process, looking into the potential acquisition of an ambulance.
Yep.
Look into further, developing a contract with West Stockbridge?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah.
Yes. So we'd have one IMA for 26 and 27 and recommending that we work toward a 2028 combined department EMS and fire. So that's what we'd be recommending to the select board at this point, with roughly a year for a building committee to go out and begin an analysis based on not just the cost and what's available, but also looking at the operational needs of the two towns.
Mm-hmm.
With a focus on Stockbridge, because we've said that we're going to we don't want the building in the way, because if it falls apart in the future or something, that this would be the home base of Stockbridge going forward. There are some possibilities we can look at if West Stockbridge has some need of space, whether it would be adding a bay to lease to them or something, but that can all be looked at over the next year by the building committee, and we would recommend some support, people being involved from West Stockbridge and bringing some input, but the committee itself would be made up of those 5 members who would make their recommendation to us.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay. That was the only question I had.
All right. Jim?
Well, there's lots of questions, but I think there's stuff that we would work out in the future, as far as, because the initial cost, I think, even a year ago was like 3 or 4 million, now it seems to be 5 million.
Yeah.
And I can see it gradually going up and up and up just because of everything, the cost of building materials and everything else. Would there be a maximum that they're saying we, wouldn't buy into more than X amount? And if that was the case, would Stockbridge say, well, we'll just end up picking up a little bit more of the cost because the building is in our town and is, so, I do think it's important to really build what we're going to need for the future. So.
And me and you have talked about that, and that's why I specifically put in here, I want to get myself, I'm a finance guy and stuff. I am not an operational fireman side. So I would trust that you guys would say, hey, here's what we need. And then also whatever you come up with, you can get to me and I'd look at how we can do some estimated costs and how does it fit within the budget, but let you guys focus on what are the operational needs. So, yeah.
So should we vote?
Well, Chuck, do you have any concerns?
Everything's.
Chief?
No, I'm full support of everything we've worked on so far and the recommendation to the select board to create another advisory committee for the station portion with 3 representatives from the fire company, a representative from finance, and 1 from the town at large.
That sounded like a motion.
Yeah. Make that as a motion?
Yeah.
There's a motion.
All right. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Unopposed? All right. So we're going to pass this on to the select board. And like I said, this will probably be in the January select board meeting. And then I'm going to present it to no, I actually have it on the agenda for Thursday in case we came to a conclusion. So we'll actually present it Thursday. And then, like I said, I'd be presenting with Marie Ryan over at the West Stockbridge to get their buy-in. And if we are, then truly we're moving forward with a potential solution. And as we've said, still the detail, we keep narrowing the focus from the 50,000 to the 5,000 to the, and hopefully over the next couple of years, we get it right down to what we need it to be. So thanks all of you for this committee, bringing this to this point, and I'll be in touch about the next steps, and we'll see how the select board votes on Thursday night and we'll go from there. So
The hope is, if it passes the select board approval, that we're going to be somewhat aggressive in getting the information out there. So there's going to be a link on the town website through the fire department side and through the town website itself as a
I'm
whole.
going to create a separate link right on the front page that's going to take people to it. I think we talked about
adding
card with a QR code to take them to the PowerPoints, to the other studies, and then have a couple public information sessions where people could come and ask questions, present it to the finance committee, because they're going to want to see the buy-in. There's a lot of things coming down the roads, and we just want to say, hey, here's where we're at. There's still some questions to be answered, but we think this overall is the first step forward in a long-range plan.
Great.
Yeah, and there's been a lot going on in the communities the past couple of years with COVID and everything else, and the highlight on the needs of EMS and adequate EMS system has really put this as a concern for many citizens, both those that live here all the time and live here seasonally. So I think this is not something that's going to be ignored by the general community. I really think there's going to be some buy-in.
All right.
Great.
Thank you.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
All right,
I,
that's everyone.